NALC Branch 183 has a history almost as long as the NALC itself. The then Rose City Branch was chartered by National February 12, 1891. It had 4 members and 1 substitute. They carried mail out of the post office located on the central square of the downtown area, today known as Old Courthouse Square, on the corner next to Wilson's grocery store. 40 years earlier, California had just become a state, and most of our area was populated with Indians. Santa Rosa was an up-and-coming town being populated with people in search of a new beginning and a better life. With 2- and 3-story buildings going up in downtown, some of which are still here today, the residents were hungry for word from home. With the new train and being only 60 miles from the San Francisco port, news to and from family far away was becoming easier and easier. The mail carrier's job was changing from one of danger and peril to one of house-to-house city delivery. With families pouring in and settling down locally, it seemed that Santa Rosa was thriving and headed towards a bright future ahead. But at 5:12 a.m., April 18, 1906, that all changed. The 10,000 people of Santa Rosa lay in their beds, just getting ready to start a new day. The earthquake was centered 2 miles off the coast of San Francisco and lasted 1 full minute. It was a 7.9 magnitude monster and pretty much leveled the whole west side of Northern California. To date, no other city has ever so damaged by an earthquake as Santa Rosa was on that day. No building escaped. Surrounding cities lay in rubble. The post office was totally destroyed. The once up-and-coming town lay in a pile of trash and debris. However, the citizens of Santa Rosa got up, brushed off, and joined together to rebuild their town. Not surprisingly, the citizens' highest concern was getting the town hall and post office up and running again. The letter carriers were now essential in bringing and taking news to family and friends across the country. Along with the new buildings came sidewalks and city streets and a new home for the future Santa Rosa post office. With city routes now in place, mail carriers were delivering on foot and by bicycle. Rose City Branch 183 had grown to about a half a dozen members who were not only providing a service to their customers, they were part of the thread that was being woven to re-energize the renewal of their beloved town. The new post office was designed by James Knox Taylor and began construction in 1908, not to exceed the sum of $100,000. A lot of money at that time, giving credence to the fact of how important the post office was in communities back then. The building was to be state-of-the-art and ahead of its time, with oil-burning lamps and hot water showers for the carriers. A far cry from the cramped conditions they were in, sharing space with so many others who were also rebuilding at this time. On March 9, 1910, Postmaster H.L. Tripp and his postal staff officially moved into the new completed Santa Rosa Post Office. With the city back on track and flourishing, the Postal Service also flourished. Mail was being shipped by boat, train, and car, as well as stagecoach that went coast to coast. Public mail receptacles were now being placed in and around the city. The post office was booming, and when the finishing touches were put into place, the new post office was completed in the summer of 1910. Santa Rosa had become the 5th largest city in California, and the carriers were feeling it. Much like today, with economic growth, people tend to spend more freely. Package delivery was on the rise since parcel post started in 1913, and other retailers were following the lead of Sears and Roebuck's, who had been publishing and distributing its catalog since 1888. The post office was indeed the cornerstone of the community, and everything was back on track. Well, kinda, sorta. This was the first time that Americans had to deal with the consequences of war. With most of the men shipped away to fight in Europe, it was left up to the women to now keep the wheels of society turning. That was also true in mail delivery. Women were hired temporarily to carry the mail until the men returned home and to their jobs. However, the Postal Service began doing observations of the women in the office and on the street, and found that they were just as capable as men when it came to mail delivery. So much so that even when the men returned from war, some women stayed on with positions as mail carriers at the request of the United States Postal Service. The war over, Santa Rosa roared into the 20s and 30s. The men were home and back to carrying the mail. Santa Rosa was growing leaps and bounds and opened up an annex on McBride to keep up with the ever-growing population of the city. Still a part of the branch, the carriers moved back and forth, bidding on routes and carrying mail out of both post offices, much as they do today. The city was split, and most of the mail was still coming with names and cities only. The Great Depression hit America where they lived. With no jobs and no money, people were scrambling to find their way. Soup kitchens and bread lines were in every city and every town. There wasn't anyone who wasn't affected by the fall of Wall Street. Towns known as Hoovervilles, named after President Hoover, started popping up all across America. Since letter carriers were so underpaid at that time, it didn't really make a difference. They had jobs and were paid, but still not enough to brag about. In the coming years, letter carriers' jobs started growing by leaps and bounds. Carriers were working with new equipment, new vehicles, and new deliveries. The job itself had changed, and the city population still remained to grow. Bigger, better, and faster was the new name in the game. Changes at the national level brought about collective bargaining, and the branch had grown to over 30 carriers, delivering to a city of over 17,000 people. With the new and bigger equipment and lots of new deliveries, it was also time for a new post office. In 1964, construction started on a new building on 2nd Street in downtown Santa Rosa. The building is now being equipped with a back dock for trucks to unload and a bigger counter to better serve the public. The new office opened in 1965. The once state-of-the-art building of 1910 was now going on over 70 years old and slated to be demolished. However, the city decided to move the building to another location, preserving the historic building. So in 1979, the post office was moved 750 feet to its new home on 7th Street between A and B. It still stands today and is home to the Sonoma County Museum and a registered historical building. The city of Healdsburg was incorporated in 1857. The then NALC branch 1618 had 6 members. In the swing room of the post office, the vote was 6-4 and 0 against the merger. It took effect on April 17, 1973, being the first branch to merge with 183. The cities of Calistoga and St. Helena were one branch, NALC branch 5585. Their cities were founded in 1876 and 1886. The vote was unanimous, and on December 11, 1980, the merge was official, being the only 2 offices in our branch outside of Sonoma County. The city of Sebastopol was incorporated in 1902. Known as the Apple Blossom City Branch, NALC Branch 3058 had 26 members. At the regular branch meeting in February, they took a vote, and the results were 25-4 and 0 against. The merge was official on May 6, 1981. The city of Petaluma was incorporated in 1858. NALC Branch 872 was chartered in 1902, becoming the second oldest branch in the area at that time. An article in the Postal Record 1912 tells a story of the state president, whom the branch invited, having a town hall meeting that all carriers in the area had attended. Carriers delivered mail out of many post offices until they settled into the Casa Grande Annex. A meeting held of all 18 members at North Bay Savings and Loan Company produced a vote that was 15-4 and 3 against the merge. On March 9, 1982, it became official. Known once as Big Valley Forbes-town, the town changed their name in June of 1861. The city of Lakeport was incorporated in 1888. NALC Branch 6139 had 8 members, and in a regular branch meeting they voted 6-4 and 0 against, with 2 absentees. The merge became official August 1st, 1986. Rohnert Park, Cotati are one of the newest cities in our branches, being incorporated in 1962 and 1963. Even though Cotati's first post office was up and running in 1893, they still to this day have no carriers in their post office. Rohnert Park Post Office opened immediately upon the city being incorporated. Carriers took a vote that was unanimous for the merge, and in early 1972, it became official. The city of Sonoma was incorporated in 1823, then known as Mission San Francisco Solano de Sonoma. NALC Branch 5485 had 33 members, and at a regular branch meeting, took a vote that was 14 for and 0 against, with 19 members absent. The papers were signed on January 17, 1989, and became the last branch that merged with Branch 183. With all the branches merged, the branch was now 120 plus members bigger over the 16-year span of the merge. We all became one official branch in September of 1987. With new branches included, the Rose City branch decided a more appropriate name was in order, and the change became official. We were now the NALC North Coast Branch 183. In the coming years, the branch kept business as usual. Meeting minutes tell of monthly labor management reports, the bad conditions on the workroom floor, concerns of the carrier's day-to-day jobs that were taken up to these monthly labor management meetings, and the outcomes of the past topics. New carriers applied for membership and old familiar faces retired, promising to keep in touch. Meanwhile, dinner dances and yearly picnics gave everyone the opportunity to see each other outside of work and talking about something other than the same old day-to-day. The late 60s and 70s were years that changed and shaped how our jobs are today. The struggles the branch faced were the same throughout the country. The meeting minutes of the branch go into detail about recordings made by President Rademacher and his messages to the branches and the carriers. In that April 1st, 1970 special general meeting about the postal work stoppage and what the course branch would take, 65 members were at that meeting with much discussion, and in the end, the secret ballot count was 57 yes and 7 no. We were following our leadership and that of our national president, James Rademacher. We were going on strike for the first and only time to date, and the carriers were totally behind it. They showed up to work only to take their belongings and their case labels. They were sick and tired of low wages and terrible working conditions, and ready to take a stand. Out of that strike came the Postal Reform Act of 1970 and guaranteed collective bargaining for NALC and its members. The branch was more in contact with the California State Association of Letter Carriers in the 80s. There was strength in numbers, and we found that our local branches to the north and to the south were also dealing with the same issues that we were. Our members were now stretching their wings and playing a huge part in the way that our union was beginning to fight back. Thanks to the letter carriers who fought so hard before us, we now had a national agreement that had terms and repercussions if these terms were not followed. It didn't take long for the branch to start learning and teaching members exactly what they were. Internally, the branch was starting to restructure its finances. Funds were set up and maintained for the future welfare of the branch. We had started a building fund to possibly buy our own meeting and office area, which we did. We were working together with local management in the areas of safety and starting programs such as having the local safety officers doing street observations on the other carriers. The organization in the branch became more structured. The general meetings were now preceded with stewards meetings to check on all the offices and the contractual support needed that could not be obtained on the workroom floor. Still keeping up with past traditions, the branch held retirement dinners and branch picnics to keep old and new members in touch. The branches that had merged with 183 were now starting to become prominent members on the board. The branch was growing by leaps and bounds. Membership was up, and with every branch election, it seemed that we were setting up the leaders that would serve us well into the future and many years to come. The very first convention the branch attended was probably in the year 1897. It was held in San Francisco. The postal record states that Petaluma had a delegate that went to the 1905 convention in Portland as well. Once again, the convention came back to San Francisco in 1913. The branch meeting minutes tell of who went to which conventions, and the branch sent at least one delegate to every national convention from 1950 through today. The branch has sent its officers to the California State Convention as far back as we have been keeping records. In the beginning, the conventions were a way to actually see the national presidents and to hear what was going on throughout the nation. In the early 20th century, communications were slow at best, and up-to-date information was usually months old. During the 1970s, President Rademacher sent cassette tapes to the branches with updates in between the conventions of news from the East Coast. As the union branches became more and more organized, so did the conventions. Early conventions were held in the big hall. Later, they became teaching areas with classes in the morning and the general meeting after lunch. Now there are training classes before and after the general meeting, and talks go way into the night. The chance to voice your concerns and hear and vote on possible amendments that affect carrier jobs across the country is not only beneficial to small branches like 183, it creates a bonding time of like-minded people with a common goal, making friends and getting to know your fellow carriers. The information at the training that is given to state and national conventions is invaluable to the carriers, stewards, and officers of our branch, as it gives us the tools that we need to help serve and defend our members better. In the 70s, the Postal Service started coming up with ways to count city carriers that they thought would streamline the process of carrying mail. The faulty programs that they used were stressful, demeaning, and basically trying to pressure the carriers to go faster and to deliver more. Harassment from supervisors was on the rise again, and working environments were getting harder and harder to deal with. Once again, there were strength in numbers, and we were meeting and forming ties with fellow branches, which would later on become vital to the newest movement in our branch history. Some carriers got together at the state level and made up a plan. These guys were later to be known as the Boys from California, and they were ready to fight postal harassment head on. Beginning in early 1993, a core group of representatives from regional NALC and Pacific Area Labor Relations, or PAL-MLC, was meeting to address ways of stimulating cultural change and improving working relationships at all levels of our organization. The NLC side of the PAL-MLC consisted of Tom Young, Al Effelbaum, Dale Hart, and Manuel Peralta. They sat down with the men from Pacific Area Labor Relations and came up with 2 volumes of working documents to protect the integrity, credibility, and relationship of all parties concerned, making California ahead of the curve on postal harassment. Locally, our branch was working on a program called the Employee Involvement Process, or EIP. Our branch leaders and members were sitting down with local managers and supervisors to discuss ways to help stop the vicious cycle of harassment that was being felt locally. A selected team would go into an office and sit down with carriers and establish a way to help find and fix any problems in that particular office dealing with harassment. While it was in operation, the program worked and there was a new level of somewhat calm in the branch. From the start of his involvement with the branch, Alex Melanie started getting us involved locally with politics. Carrying over his knowledge from serving as president of the CSALC, he knew firsthand the benefits of having friends in Congress and state. He became a part of the local labor council and served on the board. He also got the branch affiliated with the AFL-CIO in the early 90s, one of the first branches in the NALC to do that. By working with congressional people and senators at home where they lived, we put faces to the name of the NALC contributions. We supported their campaigns, walked door to door, attended town hall meetings, stuffed envelopes for them, and mobilized when they needed our help. On October 13, 2001, the downtown post office was closed after a tan powder spilled from an unmarked envelope, setting off fears that anthrax had arrived in Sonoma County. The powder was sent to a state lab for testing, and the 2nd Street post office was closed for 4 hours while FBI agents, police, and hazardous material crews collected evidence. At least 4 people, including the carrier who picked up the envelope, were taken to a hospital for tests. Even among the fears and hazards that go along with carrying the mail, the carriers of Branch 183 supported each other, bonded together, and helped each other out in whatever way we could, and in the end, the powder ended up not being anthrax. It was a reminder of the dangers of the job and just another day at work. Branch 183 hit the ground running with the National Food Drive in 1993. From its inception, we have had great success throughout the branch. The carriers have come through every year collecting more and more food donations. Every city in the branch does a remarkable job, and the community food banks are certainly appreciative. The show of help and support from the post office and its managers at the district level have helped to make this such a successful program. Each office has its own celebrations at the end of the food drive to show appreciation to each other for a job well done. With our affiliation to local labor council, we have always tried as a branch to help out other unions in their struggles. It is not uncommon to see us picketing with carpenters, nurses, and teachers. But in June of 1999, it was the letter carriers that were picketing outside the post office. National had once again called for a united demonstration to alert the public that we had been working without a contract since November, and that the modern letter sorting process put more of a burden on us every day. Most routes were 4 hours in the office and 4 hours on the street, but with the addition of DPS, it took most routes 2 hours in the office, which meant that we were on the street for 6. The longer street times meant more exposure to the elements, more deliveries, and way more burdens on our bodies. As national carriers all across the country picketed thousands of post offices, our branch rallied together. After work, every single one of the cities in our branch picketed outside their post office. Being close and beloved by our communities, we received positive words, honks of approval, and newspaper and television coverage in every city. As a force, we proved that we are something not to mess with. Again in March 2013, the rally was to tell the public we didn't want the Postal Service to deny them of their mail delivery 6 days a week. Again, our branch rallied together and we joined our sister branch 214 and our state president John Beaumont in San Francisco, where we once again received positive feedback from our communities. With the hard work and effort put out by our heads of committee, the branch has reached higher every year to outdo itself in our fundraising efforts. The tireless and usually thankless job our members do have ranked us among one of the biggest little branches, state and nationwide. With our contributions to COLSEP, the food drive, political education, rallies, and MDA, our hard work produced recognition from our state and national associations, our labor council, and our beloved cities. Since our inception 125 years ago, our branch has gone through many struggles and many joyous occasions. In my years here, I have learned that as a union, the rules need to be applied. When people are fighting for a common goal, they are mightier than any obstacle. And when you put our backs to the wall, we will stand up and fight for what is right. But with the rules and contracts and committees all in place, it is still the people, my brothers, my sisters, who make up the union in our branch and make it strong. Though many have come before me, and many are still to come, with our actions now, we are making a difference in the lives of not only our family and friends, but the future letter carriers who deserve better working conditions and able to do their jobs without fear of being fired or having to deal with harassment and have nowhere else to turn for help. With all the carriers who came before me and who fought thanklessly to keep my job safe, to put me on equal pay scales with seniority rights, and have allowed me to earn a living wage, I thank you in tribute to you and your efforts from the bottom of my heart.